Hello, my friends. My name is Adam, and I'm on a quest to be the most prolific reviewer of all time, which means I review literally everything. That's a bit hyperbolic, but I do review a lot of stuff: books, movies, podcasts, plays, sports, whatever I want, basically. A few nights ago, I watched a movie called A Pocket Full of Miracles, so I'm going to review that for you today. It is from 1961 and stars Glenn Ford and Bette Davis, and also Peter Falk. And this is Anne Margaret's film debut. So it's directed by Frank Capra, and it's one of two films that Capra remade of his own work. So this is a remake of a 1933 film, which is called Lady for a Day. So the plot of the movie is that there is this lady who is basically, she's a panhandler, she is unemployed, she's homeless, and she kind of runs this system where she controls all the people who are begging or selling things on Broadway in New York. And the reason she's doing this is she's sending money to her daughter, and for plot reasons, her daughter lives in Spain in a monastery, and she has met some rich count, and the count is going, so basically her and her fiance are coming to New York to meet her mother and her stepfather, because her mother has told her that she has a stepfather and that she's like this rich and very important lady in New York. So that's the first part, and the other part of it is that there is this gangster named, oh, I forgot what his character's name is, but it's the Glenn Ford character. One second. Dave the Dude. So her name is Apple Annie, and his name is Dave the Dude. And Dave the Dude is like this gangster, and it's the end of Prohibition. And then there is kind of a subplot where there's like this big crime boss, and he wants to take over New York, and Dave is kind of like auditioning for transitioning from being a bootlegger to a real mafia guy, which is weird that they make that distinction, that bootleggers are not real gangsters, which is crazy. But anyway, so Dave the Dude has been buying apples from Apple Annie, and he uses them to sort of for good luck and to intimidate his rivals. So he kind of gets sucked into this whole thing because he has a girlfriend named Queenie, and she wants to get married and settle down. And she's disappointed that he's not helping Annie in this whole thing. And so the whole thing comes, and Peter Falk plays one of Dave the Dude's henchmen. And then they have, so the count and his father and her daughter come, and they pull off this thing where basically all of New York society pretends that Annie is actually an important person, So Bette Davis plays Apple Annie, and Glenn Ford plays Dave the Dude. So that is the basic plot of the movie, and there are parts that are really interesting and funny about the movie, like Peter Falk. If you don't know Peter Falk played Columbo, and if you don't know Columbo, you're missing out on a lot of stuff. But yeah, Peter Falk was just amazing because he feels like the only person who's actually from New York in all of this cast. Like, he feels like the voice of reason, and everything else is just madcap and crazy. And it is sort of a madcap comedy, and or a screwball comedy, and I don't really like that kind of style of comedy very much, but I would say this one was tolerable. It's not the best comedy I've ever seen, it's not the worst comedy I've ever seen. And Bette Davis, she plays, so Bette Davis has had an interesting career because, she started in the early 30s and it wasn't very successful. And then around the middle of the 30s, with a movie called Of Human Bondage, people realized that she could act and she became like this huge star. And that lasted probably until the end of the 40s. And then in 1950, so basically by the end of the 40s, her star was fading. So in 1950, I believe, she starred in All About Eve, which I believe is one of her better films. Like, I think it's the best film I've ever seen of hers. And so that kind of revived her career, and her career was going on for another like 10 years. And well, maybe about 6 years. So about 1956, she made her last Hollywood film for a while. So this film was going to be her return. So 1961, so it's about 5 years since she's been in a major Hollywood production. And they really kind of pushed her in the marketing. Like the title credits are actually really lovely, but it's like, actually no, I'm thinking about a different movie. But anyway, so they pushed her like Betty Davis, like starring Betty Davis and Glenn Ford. And actually, she's probably co-starring it. And there was a bit of conflict in the production because Betty Davis was given the dressing room next to Glenn Ford because they're co-stars. And Glenn Ford didn't like that very much because he was actually financing this production with his own production company. Glenn Ford is an interesting character too because he's also kind of Hollywood royalty, but I don't think that he was ever as successful as somebody like Betty Davis, and I think that he kind of resented it. He started around the same time. His career was just as long. Yeah, but he wanted his girlfriend to be next to him in the dressing room. And Betty Davis was like, yeah, sure, whatever, I don't care. It's not like dressing rooms make a movie successful or not. But they didn't move her for whatever reason, and Glenn Ford really started to hate on Betty Davis, and this caused the production to be really problematic. And Frank Capra couldn't really do anything because Glenn Ford was the guy who was providing all the funding for this movie. So yeah, I think that there were a lot of missteps, and I think that Glenn Ford does an okay job in this as Dave the Dude, but it's not that you need to be believable in a movie like this because obviously it's fiction and it's a special type of fiction. You don't need to be believable, but you have Peter Falk like completely inhabiting his character and being like a New York gangster. So it's like a contrast between a night and day. I think like Glenn Ford is the Hollywood version of a gangster, and Peter Falk is like the comedic version of a gangster. So he kind of outshines Glenn Ford in every way. So the movie is completely adequate, but I don't think it's a great movie. It's not the worst Betty Davis movie film. Movie film. It's not the worst Betty Davis film I've ever seen. I think that would have to be The Man Who Came to Dinner or Murder with Mirrors, which I've reviewed recently. So I'd give this maybe like a 6 out of 10. I mean, it's okay. You could watch it for Peter Falk, but if you don't watch this movie, nothing bad is going to happen. You know, you're not missing out on not seeing this movie. That's for sure. And one small detail which makes a lot of sense is that so the two characters, like I said, are counts from Spain, and they come in and they're having a reception. So this is supposed to be in the 1930s, the repeal of prohibition, so like 1931 or something. So the Spanish flag has this purple on it because it's a Republican Spanish flag. And I thought that was a cool little vexillological detail. But of course, Capra, I think, would be would be quite aware of that because, they were making movies during the time of the Spanish Civil War. But I'm not sure how people. And well, I think maybe I'm making a bit too big of a deal about this, but I think it's a subtle jab at the fact that, because around this time, maybe a bit before it, there was sort of this whole anti-communist push in America and in Hollywood, and this is like Capra saying, we remember all of that stuff that happens or that happened in Spain. I don't want to digress too much, but maybe I should because I assume that people know what happened in Spain. So basically, what happened in Spain was that there was a Republican government, and then there was a general named Francisco Franco who kind of, well, I mean, he kind of rebelled against the government, and he was based in Morocco. So at the time, parts of Morocco were part of Spain. So he took his units, and then he invaded parts of Spain, and then other right wing figures, military figures, joined him, and they were called the Nationalists, which is weird because they're all Spanish. But anyway, they were called the Nationalists, and the legitimate government was called the Republican government. As the Nationalists theoretically were fighting to bring back the monarchy, but that didn't happen until after Franco was gone. And the problem was that the Nationalists very quickly began to be supported by fascist regimes like Italy and Nazi Germany. And sort of as a reaction to that and the fact that, Western intellectuals were supporting the Republican side, and a lot of them actually went to volunteer and fight in the war, like I think Hemingway and Orwell. But because they didn't actually have support from, regular governments like Great Britain or America, then the Republican side was kind of pushed into accepting support from the Russians. And at the time, the Russians were communist. So, Orwell explained kind of, because he was a socialist, but he wasn't a communist. So he kind of explained that in a very good book, which I don't remember what the book is called. So if you remember the book, put the book in the title. But yeah, so anyway, I think there was a lot of memory of that time, even though people didn't really talk about it. So Frank Capra would have been somebody intellectually who knew exactly what happened in Spain. And yeah, eventually the Republicans were defeated, and there were massacres, and Spain became a fascist dictatorship for until the late 80s, early 80s, till 1979 or something, with the death of Franco. And that had an effect on a whole generation of people, multiple generations of people. And I remember I had a Spanish girlfriend, and I remember we went to Spain, and we went to her village, and apparently her grandmother, I think it was great-grandmother, was hung up on the side of the road of one of these little villages because they thought that she was a communist. Probably she wasn't. It was just she was caught up in this sort of anti-communist hysteria that happened. So, yeah. So I'm 1 degree of separation away, maybe 2 degrees of separation away from those events. So seeing the Republican Spanish flag was really interesting because you don't even see it in Spain, actually. So yeah, I thought that was probably the most interesting thing about the movie, to be honest, apart from Peter Falk's performance. So sorry for the digression, but hey, that's my style. I'm not AI yet. Maybe someday, thousands of years in the future, they'll be like, you know what we really need? We need an AI version of that guy who was just doing random review stuff on YouTube thousands of years ago. Yeah, well, maybe. Probably not. Anyway, I am on, as I said, I'm trying to review about 15,000 reviews that will things that will be the world's most prolific reviewer. I'm trying to get 250 subscribers by the end of January. Right now we have 220. If you're listening on Spotify, please give me a follow. And, leave your comments about what you thought about this movie if you've ever seen it in the comments. I'm very curious to see what other people think about it. All right.